What's going on, guys? This is probably something I should have tried to mention on my last video about finishing Kydex, but actually I want to take a couple of steps back and talk about the beginning stages of finishing a Kydex sheath. And I think a lot of guys nowadays kind of shy away from Kydex, if anything for the reason that they think it scratches up knife blades, leaves marks on blades. And I want to argue that it's not actually the Kydex that's scratching the blades, but it's actually dirt and grit that gets inside the sheaths that's scratching the blades. Because one thing is for sure, Kydex is not harder than hardened steel, so the only thing it can really do is leave rub marks on the blade. And that's definitely a possibility. Usually those will rub off or buff off, polish off pretty easily. But there are some cases where you do get grit and debris inside the sheaths that'll definitely leave scratches on your blade, especially if it's little pieces of ceramic grit or aluminum oxide from sanding belts. So I want to talk about a couple things that can happen during the sheath making process as you're finishing your Kydex, and areas that I think are actually contributing to marking these knives up and scratching the blades. And I think a lot of it can happen here at the bandsaw. What ends up happening, and I have mentioned this before in a bandsaw tips video, is that as you're cutting metal, cutting steel, cutting whatever, these teeth tend to collect chips and debris from the materials you're cutting. So one thing you need to do before you cut any Kydex, which is definitely one of those materials that wants to grab anything and everything that comes near it, whether it's static, attracting the dust, or the actual stickiness of the material itself. You want to make sure you clean your blades out. And what would even be a better step than that is to use a dedicated Kydex blade, something that's only going to see Kydex. And before you put that blade on, go ahead and blow off any dust or chips from your sander to make sure you're not going to be pulling those into your sheath as you're cutting the profiles. The next area that you're definitely going to see some grit or possibility of grit getting into your blade is over at the belt grinder. If you guys are like me, after you cut things out on the bandsaw, you come and clean up the edges on a belt sander using any number of belts, whether it's aluminum oxide, silica carbide, ceramic, it really doesn't matter. Again, Kydex is a very grabby material, and if you use a brand new belt, you're definitely going to be losing a lot of that loose grit and fresh grit that comes off when you first start using a belt. So I will hardly ever use a fresh belt when it comes to grinding Kydex, especially because it's so soft. And although a worn belt will heat up the Kydex and tend to melt it a little easier than a fresh belt will, I kind of take that risk and just go a little easier, let the belt do the work, and just be a little more patient when grinding it, because you'll definitely get some loose grit flying off of there on a fresh belt and wanting to stick inside the Kydex, especially as you're shaping the mouth here of the sheath. That's just going to act like a funnel for any loose grit or steel dust or anything else that's on these belts. So definitely take one of these belt cleaners, run it over the belt for a few seconds before you start using it, and then go ahead and grind your Kydex and shape it. And I've actually even used scraps of Kydex as a belt cleaner because it does do that good of a job for pulling dirt and dust out of your sanding belts. So keep that in mind. A used belt will have much less risk of dumping ceramic grit and other types of grit inside your knife sheath, which is definitely going to contribute to marring up your brand new blades. Lastly, a couple more places to kind of take some care. Here at the drill press, drill bits can definitely hold little pieces of chips and swarf that are going to want to dislodge when you start drilling through Kydex. So just take a scrap piece of wood, scrap piece of Kydex, run them up and down your drill bits, and clean any of those chips out that might want to embed themselves when you're drilling your holes. And lastly, if you do any finishing or burnishing on the buffing wheels, just make sure you don't have a bunch of loose dirt and grit inside your buffs. That might want to dislodge itself and stick inside your sheaths. And usually when I'm done making a sheath, after I press my eyelets, done all my shaping and finishing, I'll just tap it real hard on a steel surface. And you definitely want to make sure that's clean. And then I'll go ahead and blow it out a little bit with a compressed air gun. And as long as you're careful, you should greatly reduce, if not eliminate, any loose grit that's going to get in there and mess up your brand new blades. And another thing I'll even do, go ahead and mention this, when I'm shaping the mouth of the sheath and kind of evening all that out, cleaning that up. A lot of times I'll stick a cotton ball or even a piece of torn off paper towel inside there, just to kind of block any dust and grit from dumping in there, because this really does act like a funnel when you're grinding through that. And I'll just pull that out, kind of shake any dust out, and usually should be okay. So that's it, guys. Just a few tips, maybe kind of help you guys who are seeing scratches on your brand new neck blades. I think a lot of it's happening as you're finishing the sheath. So keep that in mind, take some extra precautions, you should be alright. Thanks for watching, guys.